Robert Franklin Stroud, known as the Birdman of Alcatraz, was a convicted unaliver American federal prisoner and author who has been cited as one of the most notorious criminals in the US. During his time at Leavenworth Penitentiary, he reared and sold birds and became a respected ornithologist. From 1942 to 1959, he was incarcerated at Alcatraz where regulations didn't allow him to keep his birds. From 1942 to 1959, he was incarcerated at Alcatraz where regulations didn't allow him to keep birds. He was never released from the federal prison system. He was imprisoned from 1909 until his passing away in 1963. He was born in Seattle, Washington, and ran away from his abusive father at the age of 13. By the time he was 18, he'd become a pimp in the Alaska Territory. In January 1909, he shot and unalived a bartender who attacked his mistress, a crime for which he was sentenced to 12 years in the federal penitentiary on McNeil Island in Puget Sound. He then gained a reputation as a dangerous inmate who frequently had confrontations with fellow inmates and staff. In 1916, he stabbed and unalived a guard. He was convicted of first-degree unaliving and sentenced to unalive by hanging, but after several trials, his sentence was commuted to life imprisonment in solitary confinement. In 1920, while in solitary confinement at the Federal Penitentiary of Leavenworth, he discovered a nest with 3 injured sparrows in the prison yard. He cared for them and within a few years had acquired a collection of about 300 canaries. He began extensive research into birds after being granted equipment by a prison reforming warden. He went on to write Diseases of the Canaries, which was smuggled out of Leavenworth and published in 1933, as well as a later edition in 1943. He is said to have made important contributions to the avian pathology, most notably a cure for the hemorrhagic septicemia family of diseases, gaining much respect and some level of sympathy among ornithologists and farmers. He ran a successful business from inside the prison, but his activities infuriated the prison staff. He was then transferred to Alcatraz in 1942 after it was discovered that he had been secretly making alcohol by using the equipment in his cell. He had begun serving a 17-year term at Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary on the 19th of December 1942 and became inmate number 594. In 1943, he was assessed by psychiatrist Romney M. Ritchie, who diagnosed him as a psychopath with an IQ of 112. While he was stripped of his birds and equipment, he wrote a history of the penal system. In what came to be called the Battle of Alcatraz in May 1946, he made efforts to protect other inmates. When he was 56 years old, he climbed over the 3rd-tier railing and lowered himself to the 2nd tier, then dropped onto the floor of D block. He started closing the front solid steel doors from the 6 isolation cells to protect the hopeless men. He then yelled to the warden, explaining that there were no firearms in D block and that those involved in violence had retreated to another section of the prison. He made it clear that many innocent men would pass away if the guards continued to fire into D block. In 1959, he was transferred to the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri, where he remained until his passing on the 21st of November 1963. Stroud was born in Seattle, the eldest child of Elizabeth Jane and Benjamin Franklin Stroud. His mother had 2 daughters from a previous marriage. His father was an abusive alcoholic, and Stroud ran away from home at the age of 13. At 18, in Cordova, Alaska, Stroud met a 36-year-old, Kitty O'Brien, a female worker and dancehall entertainer for whom he pimped in Juneau. On the 18th of January 1909, barman F.K. Charlie Von Dahmer allegedly failed to pay O'Brien for her services and beat her. Stroud then confronted Von Dahmer after a struggle and shot him to death. Stroud surrendered himself. According to police reports, he knocked Von Dahmer unconscious and then shot him. As Alaska was then a U.S. territory, Stroud was prosecuted in the federal courts, where he was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 12 years in the federal penitentiary at McNeil Island, Washington. Stroud was said to have been one of the most violent prisoners at McNeil Island, frequently arguing with the staff and other inmates, and was prone to illness. He reportedly stabbed a fellow prisoner who reported him for stealing food, assaulted a hospital orderly who had reported him to prison administration for attempting to obtain morphine through threats, and reportedly stabbed an inmate. In 1912, he was sentenced to an additional 6 months for the attacks and transferred from McNeil Island to the federal penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas. On the 26th of March 1916, he stabbed Andrew Turner, a guard from the prison, through the heart after he reprimanded him for a minor rule violation that would have prevented a visit from Stroud's younger brother. In 1918, after 3 trials, Stroud was sentenced to be hanged. Stroud's mother appealed to President Woodrow Wilson, who commuted his sentence to life imprisonment. Leavenworth's warden, T.W. Morgan, strongly opposed this decision, given Stroud's reputation for violence. Morgan persuaded the president to stipulate that since Stroud was originally sentenced to await his death sentence in solitary confinement, those conditions should prevail until the halted execution could be carried out. President Wilson's Attorney General Alexander Mitchell Palmer saw to it that Stroud would spend the rest of his life in solitary confinement. While at Leavenworth in 1920, Stroud found a nest with 3 injured sparrows in the prison yard and raised them to adulthood. Prisoners were sometimes allowed to buy canaries, and Stroud had started to add them to his collection. He occupied his time by raising and caring for his birds, which he could sell for supplies and to help support his mother. According to Stroud, he used and made his first bird cage out of wooden crates. Soon after, Leavenworth's administration changed and William Biddle took over as warden. Impressed with the possibility of presenting Leavenworth as a progressive rehabilitation penitentiary, Biddle furnished Stroud with cages, chemicals, and stationery to conduct his ornithological activities. He also wrote 2 books, the 60,000-word treatise Diseases of the Canaries in 1933, which was smuggled out of Leavenworth, and a later edition, Stroud's Digest on the Diseases of Birds 1943, was updated with updated specific information. He made several important contributions to avian pathology, most notably a cure for the hemorrhagic septicemia family of diseases. He gained respect and also some level of sympathy in the bird-loving field. Stroud's activities created problems for the prison management. According to regulations, each letter sent or received to the prison had to be read, copied, and approved. Stroud was so involved in his business that this alone required a full-time prison secretary. Additionally, most of the time, his birds were permitted to fly freely within the cells, and because of the great number of birds he kept, his cell was filthy. In 1931, an attempt to force him to discontinue his business and get rid of his birds failed after Stroud and one of his male correspondents, a bird researcher from Indiana named Della Mae Jones, made his story known to newspapers and magazines. A massive letter campaign and 50,000 signatures, petitions sent to President Herbert Hoover, resulted in Stroud being permitted to keep his birds. Despite prison overcrowding, he was even given a second cell to house them. However, his letter-writing privileges were greatly curtailed. Jones and Stroud grew so close that she moved to Kansas in 1931 and started a business with him, selling his avian medicines. Prison officials, fed up with his activities and their attendant publicity, intensified their efforts to transfer him from Leavenworth. Stroud discovered a Kansas law that forbade the transfer of prisoners married in canvas. Allegedly, because of this, he married Jones by proxy, which infuriated the prison's administrations, who would not allow him to correspond with his wife. However, prison officials were not the only ones annoyed with Stroud's marriage. His mother was also allegedly very annoyed. They had a close relationship, but Elizabeth Stroud strongly disapproved of the marriage to Jones, believing women were nothing but trouble for her son. Whereas previously she had been a strong advocate for her son, helping him with legal battles, she now argued against his application for parole and became a major obstacle in his attempts to be released from the prison system. She moved away from Leavenworth and refused any further contact with him. She passed away in 1938. In 1933, Stroud advertised a publication that he had not received any royalties from the sales of Diseases of Canaries. In retaliation, the publisher complained to the warden and, as a result, proceedings were initiated to transfer Stroud to Alcatraz, where he would not be permitted to keep the birds. In the end, Stroud was able to keep both his birds and canary selling business at Leavenworth. Stroud mostly avoided trouble for several more years, until it came to light that some of the equipment he had requested for his lab was in fact being used as a homemade distillery to manufacture alcohol. Officials finally had the wedge they needed to drive him out. Citing his dangerous tendencies and long-standing concerns about the sanitary conditions of his cell, they initiated proceedings to send him to Alcatraz. On the 16th of December 1942, Stroud was transferred to Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary and became inmate number 594. He reportedly wasn't informed in advance that he was going to leave Leavenworth and his beloved birds, and was given just 10 minutes of notice before his departure. His birds and equipment were sent to his brother, as Alcatraz's strict policies meant that he was unable to continue his hobby. He spent 6 years in segregation and another 11 confined to the hospital wing at the penitentiary. In 1943, he was assessed by psychiatrist Romney M. Ritchie, who diagnosed him as a psychopath with an IQ of 112. However, his initial report in 1942, based on Leavenworth, states that he had an IQ of 116. While there, he wrote 2 manuscripts, Bobby, an autobiography, and Looking Outward, a history of the U.S. prison system from colonial times to the formation of the Bureau of Prisons. A judge ruled that Stroud had the right to write and keep such manuscripts, but upheld the warden's decision to ban their publication. After his death, the transcripts were delivered to his lawyer Richard English. Rumours of Stroud's homosexuality were noted at Alcatraz. According to Donald Hurley, whose father was a guard at Alcatraz, in an interview with Hurley for his book, a former inmate heard that Stroud was always in or later in the hospital because he was a. In February 1963, Stroud met and talked with actor Burt Lancaster, who portrayed him in The Birdman of Alcatraz. Stroud never got to see the film or read the book it was based on, but did share one of the problems that prevented parole, that he was a. Lancaster quoted Stroud as saying, during his 17-year term at Alcatraz, Stroud was allowed access to the prison library and began studying law. Occasionally, he was permitted to play chess with one of the guards. Stroud began petitioning the government that his long prison term amounted to cruel and unusual punishment. In 1959, with his health failing, Stroud was transferred to the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri, but was never released. On the 21st of November 1963, Robert Stroud died at the Springfield Medical Center at the age of 73, having been incarcerated for the last 54 years of his life, of which 42 were spent in solitary confinement. He was interred at the old Masonic Cemetery near Metropolis, Illinois, after a private funeral ceremony at Atkins Farmer Funeral Home on the 25th of November. Stroud is considered to be one of the most notorious criminals in American history. Robert Naemi states that Stroud had a and became a but was an. However, by his last years, Stroud's behaviour had allegedly improved and he was viewed more favourably. Jude Becker considered Stroud to be modest, no longer a danger to society, and having a genuine love for birds. Allegedly, given his level of notoriety, the crimes he committed were unremarkable, especially as the results he committed had a clear cause. Karl Savakis considers Stroud to have been a. Because of Stroud's contributions to the field of ornithology, he gained a large following of thousands of bird breeders and poultry raisers who demanded his release, and for many years a. campaigned to have him released from prison. However, because he had unalived a federal officer, his punishment in solitary confinement remained intact. In 1963, Richard M. English, a young lawyer who had campaigned for John F. Kennedy in California, took to the cause of securing Stroud's release. He met with former President Harry S. Truman to enlist support, but Truman declined. He also met with senior Kennedy administration officials who were studying the subject. English took the last photo of Stroud, which is shown with a green visor. The warden of the prison attempted to have English prosecuted for bringing something to the prison he did not take out, an exposed film. The authorities declined to take any action. Upon Stroud's passing, his personal property, including original manuscripts, was delivered to English as his last legal representative, who later turned over some of his possessions to the Audubon Society. Stroud became the subject of a 1955 book by Thomas E. Gaddis, Birdman of Alcatraz. Gaddis, who strongly advocated rehabilitation in the prisons, portrayed Stroud in a favourable light. This was adapted by Guy Trosper in the 1962 film of the same name, directed by John Frankenheimer. It starred Burt Lancaster as Stroud, Carl Maiden as a fictionalized and renamed warden, Thelma Ritter as Stroud's mother, and Betty Field as his wife, renamed Stella Johnson in the film. However, former inmates of Alcatraz say that the real Stroud was far more sinister, dangerous, and unpleasant than the fictionalized version portrayed in the book and film. One said, Art Carney played Stroud in the 1980 TV movie Alcatraz, The Whole Shocking Story, and Dennis Farina played Stroud in the 1987 TV movie Six Against the Rock, a dramatization of the Battle of Alcatraz of 1946. In music, Stroud has been the subject of the instrumental Birdman of Alcatraz from Rick Wakeman's Criminal Record 1977, a concept album about criminality, and the song The Birdman by Our Lady Peace is also about him. Several video games such as Galarians and Team Fortress 2 also pay homage to him. In addition, Brian Christopher Williams, a well-known rapper, adopted the stage name of Birdman.